Welcome to the Nerd Her channel. Today's video of Just the Facts is our gutting. How we gutted the bus, took the walls and the insulation out. It was about a 4-day process for us, but I kind of spliced it into about a 15-minute video with the steps that we use in order to do that process. I hope you enjoy. See you in a bit.
Alright, so here is Grandpa Nerd, and he is using a drill to unscrew those high side panels there. That was an important step to remove the ceiling. Later on you'll see us unscrewing around the window wells as well as the emergency hatch and those little rails on the side that protect the little kiddos. Now that we unscrewed those bolts or screws, Grandpa Nerd is now taking down those side panels. Now this side came down fairly easy. He just used a little muscle power and down it came. Now the other side required a little assistance. We had to use a hammer in order to get that off. And as you can see, Mel is tossing that out the back where we had a little pile that we were recycling. You want to keep your workstation very clean because those pieces can be pretty sharp. Now we've moved up to the front part of the bus. I am removing the rear view mirror, and it's a good idea to have an extra pair of hands there. The mirror is pretty heavy and those screws are in really awkward spots, so it's a good idea to have an extra pair of hands. Now we do plan on keeping the mirror and using it somewhere else in the bus. We haven't quite decided yet, but it's going to be there. Now they have turned their attention to the housing unit for where the motor for the door was. They unscrewed every screw and they used crowbars and pure manpower to try and get that off, but it wasn't budging. I am also removing the sun visor. Now I'm back up front and I am removing the insulation that we've uncovered. Now I am putting it in a big plastic bag because we don't want that insulation just floating around anywhere. You want to keep your area clean. And I'm also using a pair of gloves because I didn't want the itchy hands that come around with messing with insulation. So now they're back at it and they brought out the big guns. So what they decided to use was the True Power swizzle head shears. We bought these off Amazon for a little bit over $40. They worked great. A reciprocating saw would have worked a whole lot better, but unfortunately we left that at home. Now we will be using those shears later on in different areas, and you will see that later. Or if you've been following us, you've probably already seen it. But with a little bit of manpower, that finally came off. And the last part just seemed to come off really easy, but up to that point it was holding on. Now it's time to focus on the ceiling of the bus. We are unbolting or unscrewing all of the light fixtures, and now we're working on the walls and unscrewing those little foam pads that protect the kids and the window seals to make taking the skin off the walls a little easier. More drilling, lots and lots of screws in a bus. Now it's time to work on the ceiling. Now, our bus is a 2001 Bluebird, and well, our ceiling had a lot of rivets. Rivets. So we used a grinder and we cut the heads off, or we made little X's in the top of the heads of the rivets. It's advisable to use a full face mask because those sparks are really hot from the grinder. It's also a good idea to use hearing protection because you're in a big giant metal tube and it gets really loud in there. So, but we were taking the heads off, or at least making X's on the rivets to make it a little bit easier when it comes to removing the rivets in a few moments. Now it's time to move on to the air chiseler. Now that we've, scuffed up the tops of the rivets, we dug out the air chiseler. Now we bought this off Amazon. I can't remember the price, but I will put it in the descriptions if I can find it. It is a very heavy piece of machinery, so having that over your head was a little hard. So we did it in shifts, and it did take a lot of muscle power and finesse. I was using maximum effort to only get a few of them out. But it is very loud, so make sure that you have your hearing protection because it is like a jackhammer inside there. Very, very loud. But it worked pretty good. Now it's time to take down the skin on the ceiling. We used muscle power and crowbars to get that down. We also used gloves because the metal that comes down can be sharp. We also took down the insulation, and we are stacking all the scrap metal into piles because we plan on recycling it, and we're bagging the insulation. We also needed to take down the frame to the emergency exit. You want to keep track of the frame and put it in a safe place because you don't want to break it, and you want to keep track of those screws because you do have to put it back up. Time to put the frame for the emergency hatch back up. The reason why we're putting it back in is because, well, we're trying to keep the bus as dry as possible. Now we're working on the front of the bus, kind of doing the same thing as we did before. We removed all the rivets, and we're taking it down sheet by sheet and then removing the insulation as we go. We also took down that frame for the emergency hatch, but we plan on putting it back. Temporarily, we do plan on putting a sunroof. We think it might go there. Now it's time to work on removing the side panels of the bus. We used the air chisel, and well, it was a little easier working on the side panel with the air chisel because you weren't trying to hold that heavy piece of machinery over your head. But Grandpa found a better way.
Hello, everybody. I don't normally have a speaking part. I'm just a pretty face. But today I discovered something which I probably should have figured out a while ago. Take a center punch, knock out the center of that rivet, and when you take that gun, it just shoots right on down there instead of standing going da 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 da. But
now that Grandpa Nerd has shared his secret on easier rivet removing on the side panel, I'm over on one side of the bus, smacking a hammer to do those rivets, and Grandpa is using the air chiseler. And now, more cleanup. So, we removed the insulation, and once again, putting it in bags. We also wore gloves. Now it's time to work on the floor. We went around and we unscrewed all the little metal pieces that held down that rubber skirt down the middle. Then we rolled it up. It came up pretty easy because it was kind of wet. Then we removed the bigger parts, rolled those up, and we tossed those out the back too. It was pretty tasking. Those things kind of get heavy. And now, time to remove the plywood. We used this crowbar with a handle, and that made it a little easier. And we slid that underneath the wet plyboard or plywood and pried it up. We also had a scraper that we also used because some of the panel was held down with adhesive and things like that. So it made it a little more difficult to pull that up. But we got that up. Now we've moved to the front area of the bus using the same crowbar with a handle. And sometimes we had to knock it with a hammer in order to get those pieces of plywood up. But we kept going, and eventually we did get it all up. But it was a lot of work. And I'm up at the front trying to work around the driver's area because the rubber up there, well, it wasn't coming up quite as nicely as the other pieces. Continuing using the crowbar with the handle and the scraper to get those final pieces of plywood up off the ground. You just have to take it one step at a time and be safe about it. Try not to throw out your back or anything like that. So we're removing the last couple of pieces of the panel and the last little bit of the rubber stuff. And once you know you've done a good job and most of the work is done, it's time to sit down and take a look at your work.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that video. If you have any questions about any of the steps that we used or any of the tools that we used, please feel free to put it in the description down below. I really hope that you enjoyed the video and you give us a thumbs up. Subscribing to the channel would be very helpful for us as well. Lets us know that people are getting the word out, and lets us know that we're doing a good job. Yay, yes! Alright, well, that's going to be it for this video on just the facts of gutting our bus. Stay nerdy, my friends.